Did Moses actually see anything on Mount Sinai, or was it all a fabrication? What if the most foundational event in Judeo-Christian tradition, Moses receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, never actually happened? What if the burning bush, the stone tablets, and the voice of God were all elaborate constructions designed to establish religious authority or, perhaps more controversially, hallucinations induced by natural phenomena misinterpreted through an ancient worldview? Could one of history's most influential religious moments be based on a psychological experience rather than an objective divine encounter? The biblical account describes an extraordinary scene, Moses ascending Mount Sinai, where he encounters God in a thick cloud amid thunder and lightning, receiving stone tablets inscribed by the divine finger. For 40 days and 40 nights, Moses reportedly remained on the mountain without food or water, conditions that modern neurologists recognize as capable of inducing profound altered states of consciousness. These extreme conditions of fasting and isolation would significantly impact brain chemistry, potentially triggering experiences that would feel unquestionably real to the experiencer. The Sinai Peninsula itself presents intriguing environmental factors that could contribute to unusual perceptual experiences. The region contains several plants with psychoactive properties, including the acacia tree, mentioned extensively in biblical narratives and later used in constructing the Ark of the Covenant, which contains DMT, dimethyltryptamine, a powerful naturally occurring psychedelic compound. Some scholars have suggested that burning acacia wood could release compounds that, when inhaled, might induce visionary states. Geological evidence presents another possibility. Several potential Sinai locations show signs of past volcanic or seismic activity, which could explain descriptions of smoke, fire, and trembling earth. The burning bush phenomenon might have been natural gas igniting through a rock fissure, creating the appearance of flames that didn't consume their source. St. Elmo's fire, an electrical weather phenomenon that causes luminous plasma to appear on pointed objects, could explain reports of divine fire on the mountaintop. Yet reducing Moses' experience to neurochemistry or natural phenomena fails to explain the profound coherence of what emerged from this encounter. A revolutionary monotheistic framework and ethical system that fundamentally reshaped human history. If this was merely hallucination or misinterpreted natural events, how did it produce principles so influential they continue to underpin much of Western civilization thousands of years later? Archaeological challenges complicate matters further. Despite extensive exploration, no definitive evidence has established the historical route of the Exodus or confirmed which mountain was the biblical Sinai. Multiple candidates exist across the Sinai Peninsula and even in Saudi Arabia, with competing evidence for each. This absence of archaeological certainty has led some scholars to question whether the Exodus narrative as described in Scripture happened at all, suggesting instead that it might represent a cultural foundation myth rather than literal history. The text itself contains puzzling elements. Why did Moses need to ascend the mountain twice? Why were the first tablets broken and replaced? Why couldn't the Israelites approach the mountain? These narrative complications suggest a complex development that might reflect theological editing rather than straightforward historical reporting. Jewish mystical tradition offers an alternative perspective, that Moses' encounter was real but existed beyond ordinary perception. According to Kabbalistic teachings, what Moses saw cannot be adequately described in human language. The Torah text merely approximates an experience that transcended normal sensory categories. The Zohar suggests Moses accessed higher dimensions of reality, experiencing God through multiple spiritual lenses simultaneously. The text states Moses saw God's back, but not God's face, a metaphorical expression generating endless theological debate. Did Moses glimpse some partial aspect of divine reality while being protected from its full, overwhelming force? Or does this describe a mystical experience of divine immanence without comprehending divine transcendence? Perhaps most compelling is how Moses himself was transformed by whatever he experienced. The once reluctant leader who protested his inadequate speaking abilities returned from the mountain with such conviction and authority that he successfully transmitted a legal, ethical, and spiritual system that has endured for millennia. The Sinai event, whether understood as literal history, metaphorical truth, or something in between, became the paradigmatic revelation against which all other prophetic experiences in Abrahamic traditions are measured. The question remains, Was Moses' experience on Sinai an encounter with ultimate reality, or the product of an ancient mind interpreting extraordinary psychological and perhaps natural phenomena through the only framework available? Physical evidence and archaeological context. Sacred history or mythological construction. Where exactly is the real Mount Sinai, and why has no definitive archaeological evidence of the Israelites' presence there ever been discovered? Could the most significant mountain in religious history be hiding in plain sight, or have scholars and archaeologists been searching in entirely the wrong location for centuries? The traditional candidate for Mount Sinai, Jebel Musa in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, has been venerated since at least the 4th century CE when Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, identified it as the sacred mountain. The monastery of St. Catherine was subsequently built at its base, becoming one of Christianity's oldest continuously inhabited religious sites. Yet this identification came nearly 1,700 years after the events described in Exodus, with no clear historical chain of memory connecting the site to Moses himself. Alternative theories have proliferated, challenging the traditional location. Mount Karkam in Israel's Negev Desert has gained attention for its concentration of ancient rock art and religious sites dating to the Bronze Age. Its flat summit could accommodate the gathering described in Exodus, and its isolated position would have provided the privacy needed for a divine encounter. More controversially, some researchers propose locations in Saudi Arabia, particularly Jabal al-Lawz, which shows evidence of ancient worship and unusual blackened peaks that some interpret as residue from the divine fire described in Exodus. Proponents argue this aligns better with the biblical text's placement of Sinai in Midian, traditionally associated with northwest Arabia. The lack of archaeological evidence directly linking any mountain to the Exodus events raises profound questions. Despite over a century of intensive archaeological exploration throughout the Sinai Peninsula, researchers have found no material evidence of a large Israelite population moving through the region during the proposed timeframe. No campsite remains, no inscriptions commemorating the covenant, no artifacts that can be definitively linked to the Israelites of Moses' time. This absence has led some scholars to suggest the entire Exodus narrative might be theological rather than historical, a foundational myth designed to establish Israelite religious and national identity rather than a literal chronicle of events. Others propose a minimalist view, suggesting a much smaller group might have experienced an Exodus and Sinai revelation, with the story later expanded as it became central to Israelite identity. The geological features of candidate mountains have also generated debate. Several sites show evidence of volcanic activity, which could explain the descriptions of fire, smoke, and trembling earth in Exodus. However, the last volcanic eruption in the Sinai Peninsula occurred thousands of years before the proposed time of Moses, creating a chronological problem for literal interpretations. Natural explanations for the phenomena described have been proposed. The burning bush might represent naturally occurring methane gas igniting through rock fissures, creating persistent flames that wouldn't consume vegetation. The thunder, lightning, and trumpet sounds could describe a severe desert thunderstorm, magnified by the acoustics of mountain valleys. The thick cloud obscuring the mountain might have been a weather phenomenon or smoke from natural sources. Yet these naturalistic explanations struggle to account for the profound theological transformation that emerged from the Sinai experience. How did such natural events, even if misinterpreted through an ancient worldview, produce not just religious awe but a comprehensive legal and ethical system that would shape civilization for millennia? The tablets themselves present another mystery. Described as tablets of stone, written with the finger of God, they represent the physical evidence of divine encounter. Yet their fate remains uncertain in biblical narrative. The first set was destroyed by Moses upon witnessing the golden calf apostasy. The second set was reportedly placed in the Ark of the Covenant, which itself disappeared from historical record after the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem. This absence of physical evidence forces reliance on textual tradition alone. Dating the events presents additional challenges. Exodus provides no absolute dates, and scholarly proposals range from the 15th to the 13th century BCE, depending on how one interprets Egyptian chronology and biblical genealogies. This chronological uncertainty further complicates attempts to align textual descriptions with archaeological evidence. Perhaps the most significant insight comes from recognizing that ancient understanding of historical truth differed from modern historiography. The Exodus narrative may represent mythic history, events remembered and transmitted not primarily for their factual details, but for their significance in establishing communal identity and relationship with the divine. In this framework, the question shifts from, did it happen exactly as described? To, what truth does this narrative convey about God's relationship with humanity? Cultural and religious impact. Divine revelation or brilliant political strategy? Was the Sinai revelation truly a divine encounter? Or was it perhaps the most brilliantly executed political maneuver in ancient history? What if Moses, educated in the Egyptian royal court and well-versed in statecraft, recognized that a newly liberated slave population needed a unifying legal and religious framework to survive as a cohesive society? Could the dramatic elements of the Sinai narrative, thunder, lightning, smoke, and divine tablets, have been deliberately constructed or enhanced to establish unquestionable authority for a new social order? The timing is certainly suspicious from a political perspective. The Israelites had just escaped generations of slavery, carried plundered Egyptian wealth, and faced the daunting prospect of establishing their own society in a hostile wilderness. Lacking established governance structures, they quickly fell into disorder, as evidenced by the Golden Calf episode. The Sinai Covenant, with its comprehensive legal code, arrived precisely when this fragile community needed social organization and moral boundaries to prevent self-destruction. The content of what emerged from Sinai further supports this political interpretation. The Ten Commandments and subsequent Mosaic law address precisely the social issues that would threaten a newly formed community: violence, theft, family breakdown, false testimony, and coveting others' possessions. While including religious elements, the law code fundamentally established social order through divine sanction, a common strategy employed by ancient rulers from Hammurabi to Egyptian pharaohs, who similarly claimed divine authority for their laws. Yet, if the Sinai event were merely political theater, it achieved unprecedented staying power. The monotheistic revolution that emerged from this moment fundamentally reshaped human history, eventually giving rise to three world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that collectively include over half the world's population today. No other political construct in history has demonstrated such enduring influence. The Sinai revelation established what scholars call ethical monotheism, the revolutionary concept that a single, universal deity demands ethical behavior from humanity. This was a radical departure from contemporary religious systems where multiple gods often embodied capricious natural forces requiring appeasement rather than moral conduct. The transformation of religion from ritualistic transaction to ethical relationship represents one of humanity's most significant philosophical advances. The concept of covenant introduced at Sinai, a binding agreement between God and people, created a new paradigm for understanding divine-human relations. Unlike other ancient religions where humans existed primarily to serve the gods' needs, the Sinai covenant established mutual obligations and a partnership model that would influence religious thought for millennia. God commits to protecting and blessing Israel. Israel commits to following divine law. This reciprocal relationship introduced accountability in both directions, a revolutionary theological concept. The tablets themselves, physical objects allegedly inscribed by God, became the archetypal sacred text, establishing the concept of divine revelation recorded in written form. This textual foundation would transform religious practice from primarily oral tradition to scripture-based faith, eventually producing the phenomenon of people of the book that characterizes Abrahamic religions. The concept that divine will could be captured in written form and studied by future generations represented a profound shift in how humans conceived of accessing divine truth. Perhaps most significantly, the Sinai revelation established the concept of a covenant community bound by shared moral obligations rather than merely ethnic or geographical ties. This introduced the revolutionary idea that a people could be defined primarily by their relationship to divine law rather than bloodlines or territory, a concept that would enable Judaism to survive millennia of diaspora existence without a homeland. The mystical dimension of Moses' experience established a template for prophetic encounters across religious traditions.